Hi everyone. Today we want to talk about equilibrium business cycle model further. And for this supplement video, we are going to introduce a diagrammatic way to apply the model. For the diagram, we are going to focus on goods market, which is final output market. We want to use the market to analyze the mechanism that governs goods production over time. So how comes in some period output is higher, in the other period output is lower. So it is about the resource allocation over time in final goods market. And we want to focus on how are these intertemporal resource allocations are determined, especially for the demand side. And basically the price mechanism that allocate these final production resources and demand over time is interest rate. So we are going to use the interest rate to be the market clearing price. So let's start our graph. We focus on today's goods market. I mark the timeline today because there are infinitely many good market across time. There are goods market for today, for tomorrow, for the day after tomorrow. And we want to focus on today. So on the y-axis, the price is the interest rate today. So this interest rate today is like it's act as a price mechanism. It's going to adjust the demand for today's output, and it also will adjust to affect today's production. We first start from the today's output demand. We use a notation YD. And basically, it will be a negative slope line. It means that the higher the interest rate today, the lower the demand for today's final output. And the reason behind that is from the intertemporal substitution effect and the change of investment cost, which we will discuss in detail further. To derive that kind of negative slope final output demand curve, we have to go back to the sources of this demand curve. There are two sources. The first one is consumption. And basically, it would be a negative slope line with interest rate. So if we start from the interest rate as a gray point, and basically if today's interest rate goes up, we learn from the past that it will trigger an intertemporal substitution effect, making today's consumption less attractive, and because saving now give you a better return. Therefore, this kind of intertemporal substitution effect would decrease your consumption today. That's why we have higher interest rate today induces a lower consumption today. This is due to ISE, intertemporal substitution effect. And the other source of negative slope line YD is from investment. Basically, it is also a negative slope line. We start from this point I star, interest rate little I star, and the investment level capital I star. Whenever the interest rate becomes higher, then the investment demand usually will be lower. That is because higher interest rate today represent higher investment cost today. That's why the decision for investment will be lower today. So in a closed economy, basically the demand for final output is the sum of today's consumption and today's investment. So we draw both negative slope line of consumption investment on the same graph. We put them next to each other. And now we are going to derive the YD curve from consumption investment curve. So we start from interest rate I1. And at this interest rate, we know that the consumption today is going to be C1, and then the investment today would be I1. And therefore, today's final goods demand would be simply equal to the sum of C1 plus I1, which give us the gray point, gray dot on the today's goods market. And now, if we increase the interest rate to I2, then with this new higher interest rate, the consumption level today would drop to C2, and the investment level today would drop to I2. Therefore, under the higher interest rate level of I2, the final output demand quantity will be simply C2 plus I2, which is less than C1 plus I1. If we continue to increase or decrease interest rate today further, we are going to trace out a negative slope final output demand curve. So basically, you can see that the curve, it has a negative relationship with today's interest rate is because the higher the interest rate, the larger the intertemporal substitution effect that would reduce today's consumption. At the same time, high interest rate will also decrease investment today because investment costs will be higher. And now we can move on to derive the supply curve for today's final output. Basically, it would be a positive slope line against today's interest rate. The higher the interest rate today, basically, we know that if today's interest rate is higher, it would induce a higher labor supply. This is because of intertemporal substitution effect as well. Because if today's interest rate higher, saving become more attractive. Therefore, to achieve a higher saving, you will be willing to work harder. So if everybody want to work harder, then the final output in the market will be larger. That's why today's output from the production side has a positive relationship with today's interest rate. So together, we can put YS and YD together on the same graph. Then this graph will determine the equilibrium interest rate for today and the equilibrium output, final output for today. And based on this horizontal summation that we get from consumption investment, with the equilibrium interest rate I1, little I1, we can trace out the consumption today will be C1 and the investment today will be I1. Now we want to use the diagram to analyze what will happen when there is temporary good news on supply side. We only focus on today's good market clearing. So suppose originally the market is in equilibrium, so equilibrium interest rate I today is I1, little I1, and the equilibrium total output is Y1. Now suppose there is some good news that can increase today's productivity only. Here I put down only, which means this good news only lasts for one period. In this case, because of this increase of productivity, automatically the final goods supply will be higher. And then with this higher final output, it will induce certain welfare from the wealth effect. And the wealth effect, because now the whole economy become more productive, therefore people somehow will get wealthier and it will push today's consumption. But because this is a temporary good news, so such kind of wealth effect can only push today's consumption mildly. This is because of consumption smoothing, so that you can see that the consumption line moves outward but very little. And because consumption curve move outward, therefore YD line will also move outward, also very little. So from the graph, we know that if interest rate stays at little I1, then there would be excess supply, because under that interest rate, YS quantity is larger than YD quantity. Therefore, the economy will produce too much than the demand. Therefore, interest rate has to drop so that it can induce higher demand from consumption and from investment. So a new equilibrium would be the blue dot line, and which gives us equilibrium interest rate to be little I2 with a higher output level Y2. And under these new lower interest rate level, we are going to be able to find out that the new consumption level would be C2. And the change of consumption from C1 to C2, this increase comes from two effects. First is that consumption mildly increased because of the gentle wealth effect. And then because the interest rate today is going to drop, which will induce a higher consumption further because of the intertemporal substitution effect. And other than the demand from the consumption side, demand from investment is also higher when the interest rate drop because investment will increase as the interest rate cost dropped. Now we are going to discuss the situation that the good news on the supply side is still temporary, not permanent, but actually it is persistent. This is more consistent with reality for business cycle because during boom time, the economy is doing well, not just for today. It usually will continue for a few periods, then start to drop down. So persistency is important during business cycle. So we still use the same diagram to analyze the impact on final goods market today. So now, because the news is about the increase of productivity, so as before, the final output production, the supply curve was increased, it will move to the right. And then there will be a wealth effect that pushed consumption today to the right. But because of the persistency, this kind of good news will last for a few more periods. So now we would drive the increase, it would drive the consumption curve to the right further. So now consumption curve move farther away from before. And then because of that, so therefore the final output demand curve will move to the right more than the previous case. However, because of the consumption smoothing, which means that when consumption moves to the right, it will still be less than the increase of wealth coming from the production. Therefore, normally we would still expect there will be excess supply if there's no adjustment in interest rate I1. Okay, so which means that when today's output increase, then today's demand side from consumption spending will not increase as much. That's why if there's no change of consumption further, then the output, there will be some income from output that's never spent. So that's why we have excess, still excess supply there. And however, you have to be careful that because now we are analyzing persistent temporary good news. So the good news will last not only today, but it will last even, it will affect tomorrow's productivity. So if we look at the productivity for tomorrow and we focus on the rental market of capital, it will mean that such kind of good news will last and increase the productivity of capital as well. Therefore, for the capital demand curve, which comes from the marginal productivity of capital, tomorrow it will increase. Therefore, we know that tomorrow's rental price of capital would increase as well. It means that holding more capital now can give you better payoff in the future. Therefore, your investment demand today will be higher because you would have a high incentive to buy more machine now in order to hold more capital tomorrow to gain these better payoff in the future. So from the diagram, actually investment demand will also increase as well. It would increase due to higher future payoff on capital. This comes from the persistency that we assume during business cycle. So we can see that investment curve now shift further to the right. However, when the investment demand shift to the right, which would mean that the final output demand YD curve will shift to the right further. And when such kind of a temporary good news on productivity is persistent enough, then at the end, actually, the increase of YD can be large enough so that at the end, this kind of strong demand due to persistency, actually at the end can actually increase today's interest rate from I1 to I2. And while at the same time, output is increasing from Y1 to Y2, interest rate actually is increasing from I1 to I2. And under the new interest rate, we are going to map out the new equilibrium consumption level that will be C2. And with the increase of interest rate, actually investment does not decrease. It's actually increased from I1 to I2. This increase of today's investment is mainly triggered by the fact that now the incentive to invest actually come from a better gain from tomorrow's capital rental price. So in this case, both equilibrium consumption and investment rise. So if you could try to practice these two scenarios in your own free time, you understand this diagrammatic analysis better.